My name is Skylar Dawson. I'm 24 years old, and I was born and raised in Savannah, Georgia. To most people who knew us, my family looked like something out of a Southern Living magazine. Mom, Dad, my older sister Riley, and me. We lived in a beautiful brick house with wraparound porches, magnolia trees lining the driveway, and a white wooden swing in the front yard. My mom loved appearances. Everything had to look perfect, and for a while, I believed our family really was. But that illusion shattered the moment I received that text. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear how I turned my family's betrayal into a powerful turning point I never expected. It was a Thursday. I remember because I had just finished a long shift at the flower shop where I worked part-time. I was covered in pollen and petals when I pulled out my phone and saw the message. We changed the door locks and updated the gate code. Don't bother coming. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. I stared at the screen, frozen, rereading those words like they might magically make sense on the third or fourth attempt. But they didn't. They only grew heavier. My heart began to pound in that slow, hollow way, the kind of dread that starts in your chest and seeps into your stomach like poison. I called her immediately, straight to voicemail. I texted back, "What's going on?" No answer. I tried my dad. He picked up but only said, "It's what your mother wants," and hung up before I could even process the words. Just like that. At first I thought maybe there was some mistake, that maybe they were doing renovations, or maybe it was a miscommunication, some warped misunderstanding that would soon be cleared up. But it wasn't. It was real. I was being shut out of my own family, exiled with a single cold message. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my tiny apartment staring at the ceiling, reliving every memory I had of our home, our dinners, holidays, lazy summer afternoons on the porch. None of it made sense. I hadn't fought with them. I hadn't done anything wrong, or at least, nothing that deserved something this drastic. And the more I thought about it, the more that cold, empty feeling in my chest turned into something else, a flicker of anger. The next morning, I drove over to the house. The gate that used to open with a code I knew by heart now blinked red when I tried it. I got out and looked through the bars. Our golden retriever, Daisy, was lounging in the yard, but she didn't even bark. She just looked up lazily, her tail thumping once before going still again. The house was still there, beautiful and glowing in the Georgia morning sun, but it felt foreign. I rang the bell. Nothing. I knocked. Still nothing. But I could see the curtain move in the upstairs window. Someone was there, watching, pretending not to be. I stood there for 15 minutes before I gave up and walked away. But even as I turned back to my car, something shifted in me. I wasn't going to let this go. That weekend, I stayed up piecing together every recent moment with them. My mom had been distant lately. Riley, too. Dad never talked much anyway, but still, nothing that explained this. I called my Aunt Kara, my mom's sister, to see if she knew what was going on. She answered on the third ring. "Skylar?" she said, cautious. "Are you okay?" "No," I said. "Did Mom say anything to you? About shutting me out?" There was a pause. "Kara?" I pressed. "She said you'd been reckless, that you caused trouble for the family." My stomach dropped. "What? That's not true." She wouldn't tell me details, just that there was a situation, something that Riley told her. Riley. It always comes back to Riley. My older sister has always been the favorite. She's the golden girl. Perfect grades, perfect fiancé, perfect life. She moved back in with my parents after a rough patch with her fiancé, and from what I could tell, she'd wormed her way back into every corner of their lives. I used to think we were close, but now I wasn't so sure. The thought that Riley had something to do with this wasn't just a suspicion, it became an obsession. I needed to know what she said. I needed to know how she convinced our parents to lock me out of my own home and act like I never existed. A week passed. I lost sleep. I lost focus at work. I stopped trying to eat. My life had started to spiral into this whirlpool of confusion and betrayal, and every day I looked at that text again, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. It was real, and it wasn't going away. Then, one evening, as I was walking home from work, I saw Riley's car parked outside a restaurant near downtown. Without thinking, I walked inside. She was sitting alone at a corner table, sipping white wine and scrolling through her phone like the world hadn't collapsed around her. I walked straight to the table. "We need to talk." She looked up, blinked, smiled, like she was surprised, but not scared. "Skylar," she said, all fake warmth. "Wow, it's been a while. Why did you tell Mom and Dad to lock me out?" Her smile didn't falter, but I saw it in her eyes, the flicker of satisfaction. "I didn't tell them to do anything," she said, setting her glass down. "I just told them the truth." "What truth?" "That you've been manipulative, always playing the victim, stirring things up when you don't get your way." I laughed bitterly. "That's rich coming from you." She leaned back. "Look, you're the one who chose to leave. You moved out. You stopped calling. What did you expect? I didn't choose to be erased, but that's what they were doing. Erasing me. Rewriting our family story so I was the villain, or worse, so I didn't exist at all. And Riley was right in the center of it. I left that restaurant with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. My hands were shaking. I had always been the quiet one, the one who let things go. But something about that encounter sparked something deeper in me, something I hadn't felt in years. They wanted me gone. Fine. But I wasn't disappearing quietly. I went home that night and pulled out a dusty box from my closet. Old journals, notes, photos, and one very specific file folder I hadn't looked at since I was 16. It was filled with papers, copies of emails, messages, receipts, evidence of something I'd stumbled across by accident back then, something I hadn't had the courage to face. But now I had every reason to, and I was going to use it. I didn't sleep that night either. I sat cross-legged on my hardwood floor, surrounded by papers that smelled of dust and time, lit only by the soft glow of my desk lamp. My fingers trembled as I read through them one by one. At 16, I'd found out something I was never supposed to see. A bank statement in Riley's name that listed regular withdrawals from one of our dad's business accounts. I remember thinking it must have been a mistake, but then I found more. Emails with her name, her IP address, and accounts in her name connected to offshore wire transfers. I was just a teenager, but even then, I knew this wasn't normal. I brought it up to Mom, innocently. I thought maybe she'd clear it up. Maybe it was some legal arrangement I didn't understand. But she shut it down instantly. Her exact words, "Don't ever go through other people's things again, Skylar. That's not who we are." I had felt ashamed for months, even after I burned the idea out of my mind and buried the folder in the back of my closet. But now, everything came rushing back. They didn't exile me because I was reckless. They exiled me because I knew something. And maybe, just maybe, Riley realized I hadn't destroyed the evidence. That was the first time I let the thought creep in. What if they were protecting her? What if they were covering for her? Maybe even helping her? The next morning, I scanned every document into an encrypted drive. I started mapping out the connections, tracing the dates and amounts. Some of the transfers happened when Riley was in college. Some matched the dates of her extravagant vacations she'd bragged about. The more I looked, the more I saw a pattern, and none of it painted her as innocent. I took a day off work and drove to Atlanta to meet with a former friend of mine, Ellie, who now worked in forensic accounting. We hadn't talked in over a year, but she still greeted me with a smile. I told her the basics, enough to get her interested, but I didn't mention my family. She looked through the files quietly for about 15 minutes before finally speaking. "Skylar, this isn't just sketchy. It's illegal. Fraud, laundering, maybe even embezzlement. Where did you get this? Let's just say it was left in my care." She raised her eyebrows but didn't ask more. "What do you want to do with it?" I didn't know yet. I just knew I needed to understand the full scope of what I had before I made any move. By the time I drove back to Savannah, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. I didn't trust them, not with my family's name and influence. My father was on several charity boards. My mother was well connected in the city's social scene. And Riley? She had her claws in too many places to count. I needed more leverage. So I started playing the game their way, I showed up at the local country club where my mother lunched every Thursday. I didn't speak to her. I didn't even look her way. I just made sure I was seen, chatting with her old bridge partner, laughing with a few of the women she usually kept around for show. I could feel her eyes burning into my back the entire time. The next day, I posted a photo of myself and Ellie on Instagram with the caption, "Reconnecting with old friends and doing big things. Stay tuned." I knew Riley followed me on a burner account. She was never good at hiding it. The following Monday, my dad called me. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Skylar?" he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing?" I let silence stretch between us. "You're stirring things up," he continued. "Your mother's upset." "She should be," I said calmly. "You all should be." A pause. "You need to let this go." That was it. No denial. No confusion. Just an order. "So it's true," I whispered. "You've known all along. We've done what's necessary to protect this family." I nearly laughed. "By pretending your daughter isn't siphoning money out of your company?" He didn't answer. Just the sound of quiet breathing. "I have everything," I said softly. "Emails, transfers, records. You think locking me out is going to stop me? You'll ruin all of us." "You already did." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From fury. From years of being ignored, erased, treated like the black sheep for asking too many questions and seeing too much. I had lived under their rules for too long. They didn't want a daughter who thought for herself. They wanted another Riley. But I wasn't Riley, and I was done staying quiet. Later that week, I went back to Ellie with more information. I wanted her help to create a full report, one that didn't just implicate Riley, but showed how my father may have covered it up, maybe even assisted. It was risky, but I needed to understand the depth of their betrayal. The deeper we dug, the worse it got. Riley had opened at least 3 accounts under aliases, names that matched distant relatives or maiden names on my mother's side. Several transfers were routed through dummy companies registered in Nevada. The amounts weren't small. We were talking hundreds of thousands. Money that was unaccounted for in public reports. I also found that one of the largest transfers happened just before Riley's engagement was suddenly canceled. A 5-figure amount sent to a private investigator in Florida. No name attached. Just a service code. What was she digging for? Or worse, what was she paying someone to bury? That became my next mission. I traced the PI, posing as someone who wanted to hire him. He was cautious, but money talked. After a few phone calls and a large deposit, I convinced him to meet me in person. We sat across from each other in a quiet hotel lobby, and when I told him who I really was, he nearly stood to leave. "I don't want trouble," he said. "You've already had it," I replied, sliding a photo of Riley across the table. "Tell me what she paid you to find." He stared at it for a long moment, then sighed. "She wanted dirt. On a guy. His name was Adam Klein." I felt my stomach twist. Adam was her fiancé. She wanted to know if he had any skeletons. I didn't find much, but she asked me to forge a few things anyway. Emails, texts, fake screenshots. Said it was to protect her. I stared at him in disbelief. She destroyed him. He shrugged. "Not my business." But it was mine now. Riley hadn't just stolen from our family. She destroyed the man who loved her. She manipulated our parents. She shut me out because I might have remembered something. And now I had it all. I had motive. I had proof. And I had something they never expected. I had time. Time to plan. Time to take everything back. And I would. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. I didn't tell anyone what I planned next. Not Ellie. Not my coworkers. Not the few friends I still had left in Savannah. I moved through the days like a shadow, smiling when necessary, playing the part of the forgotten daughter who had moved on. But inside, I was burning. Not with rage anymore, but with purpose. And the longer I waited, the clearer it all became. My family had decided that I was disposable, that I could be erased for the sake of their perfect image, that I could be silenced. But they didn't understand something critical. When you push someone out and slam the door behind them, they don't always walk away. Sometimes they find another door. and sometimes they kick it down. The first step in my plan wasn't revenge. It was strategy. I needed to confirm one more thing before everything fell into place. I requested a meeting with Adam Klein. I had to know the full truth about what Riley did to him. I wasn't sure he'd agree to meet me, but to my surprise, he replied almost immediately. We met in a quiet corner of Forsyth Park, under the shade of an old oak tree. He looked older, tired. His eyes carried that weight people wear when they've been wronged deeply and never quite recovered. "Skylar," he said, extending his hand with cautious warmth. "It's been a while." "I know," I said. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if I should, but I figured if you were reaching out, maybe it had to do with her." "It does." He exhaled and sat on the bench beside me. "I know what she did," I began. "Not all of it, but enough. I saw the money trail. I talked to the investigator. I know about the fake screenshots." He turned to look at me, his jaw clenched. "She told everyone I cheated. Sent screenshots to my family, my employer, her friends. Overnight, I went from being her fiancé to a pariah. My company asked me to take a leave of absence. My parents didn't speak to me for months. I lost everything. She ruined your life." And smiled while she did it. He paused for a moment, and I could feel his pain in the silence between us. "I kept waiting for someone in her family to realize what she was doing," he said softly. "But then your mom started calling me unstable. Your dad threatened legal action if I ever tried to contact her again. That's when I realized they were all in on it. Or at least they were willing to protect her no matter what she did." That's what I needed to hear. Not because I doubted him, but because it cemented my decision. My parents had chosen Riley over truth, over decency, over me. There was no going back. "Would you be willing to help me?" I asked, turning to face him. He raised an eyebrow. "Help you how?" "I'm not just exposing her. I'm going to dismantle the lie. All of it. Everything they built to keep her image clean. And I want them to feel it." He looked at me for a long time before answering. "You sound like someone with nothing left to lose." I smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I am." Over the next few weeks, Adam and I worked quietly. We didn't talk often, but when we did, it was deliberate. We created a timeline, matched my evidence with his experience, connected dots I hadn't even thought to look for. He gave me access to emails, voicemails, even a legal cease and desist letter he had received from my family's attorney. It was all clean, documented, undeniable. Ellie compiled everything into one file, professionally formatted, clearly sourced, and devastating. She didn't ask what I planned to do with it. She just handed it to me in a flash drive and said, "Whatever you're about to do, make sure it's worth it." It would be. I waited for the right moment. Riley's 31st birthday party was being hosted at the house. A massive celebration with over 100 people invited. Politicians, executives, old money families from all over Georgia. It was the perfect stage. And I wasn't even on the guest list. No one knew I had been in contact with Julia Monroe, a local journalist who specialized in investigative pieces. She had exposed corruption in city departments, uncovered fraud in local charities, and earned a reputation for never backing down. I sent her the file anonymously at first, but when she reached out asking to meet, I knew I had her attention. We sat across from each other in her office, the blinds closed, her eyes scanning the flash drive on her laptop screen. "This is real," she muttered. "Yes. And you're sure you want this published?" I want it published the night of her birthday party. I want it to hit the internet while every guest in that house still has their wine glass in hand. "Ah," she looked at me with something between concern and admiration. "You do realize this is going to destroy their reputation, possibly even launch a criminal investigation." I nodded. "Good," she said, "because this deserves to be seen." The night of the party arrived. I didn't dress for it. I wore jeans and a hoodie, parked 2 blocks away, and watched from a distance. Cars lined the street. Music drifted through the open windows. Laughter, clinking glasses, the unmistakable sound of celebration. At 8:17 p.m., Julia published the article. It didn't take long. Phones began lighting up like fireworks. The mood in the house shifted from festive to frenzied. People started whispering. Some guests stepped outside to make calls. Others left altogether. I couldn't see everything from my vantage point, but I could imagine the panic in Riley's eyes, the confusion in my mother's voice, the cold silence of my father when he realized it was over. I left before the sirens arrived. The next morning, Savannah woke up to scandal. "Golden Girl of Savannah exposed in multi-year fraud scheme," read one headline. "Local businessman implicated in daughter's financial crimes," read another. The article had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. Forums dissected it. My family's perfect image crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave, and I felt nothing but clarity. They had locked me out of their house, their hearts, their lives. But I had found a door of my own. And when I walked through it, I didn't just return. I burned the blueprint behind me. I received a text from my mother 2 days later. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. Adam sent me a simple message. "You did it." Yes, I did. But it wasn't over yet. Because vengeance doesn't stop at the reveal, it follows through. After the article exploded, I went quiet. Not out of fear, but out of necessity. In stories like these, the people who rush to speak too soon end up tangled in noise. I wanted no part of that. Let the headlines do the talking. Let the world draw its conclusions. I had already lived my truth. I didn't need to explain it. But that didn't mean the silence was easy. In fact, it was the hardest part. When the smoke began to settle, it left space for something else. Grief. I had destroyed my family's image. Not just Riley's, not just my father's business, but the entire illusion of unity we'd presented to the world for so long. I watched as social media turned cold. Old family friends who used to like my pictures and comment with hearts stopped acknowledging my existence. My phone didn't ring. No one knocked on my door. I had walked into the fire and emerged, yes. But on the other side, everything familiar was gone. I thought I'd feel victorious. Instead, I felt untethered. One night, about a week after the article dropped, I walked back through Forsyth Park. The same bench where I'd spoken to Adam sat empty under the stars. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint hum of faraway voices, laughter, the soft clink of silverware from a restaurant nearby. The world hadn't stopped, not even for a moment. It had kept turning, indifferent to my revolution. I sat there a long time, trying to remember what life felt like before the war I started, before the exile, before the silence. And then I heard a voice. "I didn't think I'd see you here." I turned. It was Ellie. She looked tired, but not in the way people do when they've been working late. In the way people do when they've watched a friend walk through fire and weren't sure if she'd come out. "Did you get my message?" she asked. I nodded. "I just didn't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." She sat beside me and we didn't speak for a few minutes. Then she whispered, "It's okay to feel lost after something like this." "I don't feel lost," I said. "I feel like I'm floating. Like everything I used to stand on is gone. The house, the people, the traditions, even the anger." "That's because you reached the other side." I didn't respond. Maybe I wasn't ready to hear that yet. Over the next few days, I started to rebuild. Not in grand gestures, not with social media posts or public statements, but in quiet, personal decisions. I canceled my lease and found a smaller apartment, one with sunlit windows and hardwood floors I could sit on without being surrounded by evidence of betrayal. I quit my job at the flower shop. It was time to stop surrounding myself with beauty I couldn't afford to feel. Instead, I started freelancing, writing, researching, digging into stories that mattered. I found other people like me, people who had been silenced by families, companies, institutions. I wrote about them, anonymously at first, then under my own name. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years trying to belong to a family that demanded silence. Now I was building a life around speaking, and with every word I wrote, every truth I shared, I started to feel real again. But that didn't mean closure had arrived. That didn't mean healing came all at once. There were days when I woke up in a cold sweat, heart racing, still expecting a knock on the door from a lawyer, a reporter, my mother. There were nights when I dreamed of sitting around the old dinner table, all of us smiling, untouched by deceit. Then I'd wake and remember none of it had ever been that pure. And then there was the day the lawsuit arrived. A thick envelope, hand-delivered. Inside, a civil suit from my father, claiming defamation, reputational damage, intentional sabotage. It was everything I had expected, and yet it still sent a shock through me so deep I couldn't speak for hours. I called Ellie. She came right over. We sat at my kitchen table as she flipped through the pages. "This is desperate," she said. "And weak. It's punishment." "No," she replied. "It's fear." I wanted to believe that, but the old doubts began to whisper. What if they dragged me through court for years? What if they took what little money I had? What if this wasn't the end but just the beginning of another battle I couldn't win? But then I thought about that girl at 16, the one who had found the folder, who had gone to her mother and tried to do the right thing. She was shut down, told to be quiet, told to behave, and now she was here, holding the evidence that had burned an empire down. I wasn't her anymore. I contacted Julia, the journalist. Within a week, a second article dropped, this one outlining the retaliatory lawsuit. Public opinion shifted fast. My father's name became synonymous with arrogance. Riley disappeared from the public eye. My mother made no statements, but I received an anonymous letter, typed and unsigned, that simply said, "This didn't have to happen." Yes, it did. It had to happen because no one else had the courage to expose the rot. It had to happen because silence was never safety. It was complicity, and I wasn't going to be complicit anymore. The lawsuit was quietly dropped 3 months later. No apologies, no acknowledgement, just a legal withdrawal, a final act of cowardice. And still, I didn't celebrate. Not loudly, at least. Instead, I went to the beach, alone. I stood at the edge of the water, letting the tide wrap around my ankles, the cold sand pull me slightly down with every wave. I closed my eyes and breathed, deeply, not just to feel calm, but to remind myself that I was still here, still standing, still breathing. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time in years. They tried to erase me, but I became the only version of myself I could live with, honest and unafraid. I didn't send it to anyone. I didn't need to. The next time I saw Adam, he looked different, lighter somehow. He told me he'd moved to North Carolina, started a new job, found someone, a real someone. "She knows everything," he said, and she stayed. I smiled. "You deserve that." "So do you," he replied. I wasn't sure yet if I believed him, but it felt good to hear, because growth doesn't come from revenge. Not entirely. It comes from survival, from finding a way to keep going even after the war is over, even when the battlefield is empty, and the only sound left is your own heartbeat echoing in the silence. And in that silence, I found something I never expected: peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from knowing you never have to forget to be free. The calm didn't last forever. Peace has a way of luring you into comfort right before reality reminds you that not every wound is done bleeding. It had been 5 months since the second article, and while most of Savannah had moved on, the ones who hadn't were the ones who mattered most. My family hadn't spoken a word to me. Not a call, not a text, not even a lawyer's letter since the suit was dropped. It was as if I had never existed. The girl who once sat at the head of the Thanksgiving table, who stayed up with Mom watching black and white films, who carved pumpkins with Dad every October. She had been scrubbed from their memory like chalk from a sidewalk after the rain. But there was one person I hadn't confronted. Not directly. Not yet. Riley. I knew she was still in town. A friend of a friend had seen her at a boutique downtown, wearing sunglasses indoors and avoiding conversation. According to whispers, she'd lost her job at the consulting firm, the one she only had because of our father's influence. Her name was toxic now. Sponsors dropped her. Her wedding wasn't just postponed, it was erased. But still, she hadn't reached out to me. Not even to scream. Not even to defend herself. That silence haunted me more than any insult could have. And maybe that's why I did it. It was a Sunday afternoon when I pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex. A sleek, modern building tucked behind a wall of oaks. I waited in my car for nearly an hour before I saw her. She stepped out in a black hoodie, her blonde hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked thinner, pale, her shoulders hunched forward like the world had grown heavier. I got out of the car and called her name. She froze. When she turned, I saw a flicker in her eyes. Recognition, then fear, then something else. Maybe shame. "Skylar," she said, her voice hoarse. "We need to talk." She hesitated. "Now?" "I won't ask again." After a long pause, she gestured toward the building. We climbed the steps in silence. Her apartment was sparse. Most of the furniture was gone. Boxes were stacked in the corner, half sealed, half forgotten. The place smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly bitter, like wine spilled and never properly wiped up. She sat on the edge of the couch and looked at me. "Well," she said, "you ruined me." She didn't respond. "I loved you," I continued. "You were my sister. You were supposed to protect me. And instead, you lied. You lied to Mom. You lied to Dad. You turned them against me. You faked cheating evidence to destroy Adam. You stole money, Riley. You built a house of cards and expected no one to blow on it." "I didn't expect you," she said quietly. "Why?" I asked. "That's all I want to know. Why?" She stared at the floor. Her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "Because you were always the better one." I blinked. "What?" "You were the one who cared, who felt, who believed in things. Mom never understood you, but I did. And it scared me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. So, you punished me for it?" I panicked. I thought if I lost control, I'd disappear. So I took more. I lied more. And when you got close, when you remembered those emails, I knew it was over. I didn't expect an apology, and I didn't get one. But for the first time, I saw her as something other than a monster. I saw the fear, the weakness, the girl who built a throne from the people around her because she never believed she could stand alone. "I should hate you," I said. "You do." "No," I replied. "I pity you." And I meant it. Because Riley hadn't just lost her career, her fiancé, her status. She'd lost her soul. I stood to leave, but she stopped me. "There's something else," she said. "You should know." I turned slowly. "Dad made me do it," she whispered. "Not the stealing, but the cover-up. He said if I didn't get rid of the evidence, he'd let me take the fall alone. He was going to shift the blame entirely on me. That's why I told Mom it was you, that you were unstable, that you couldn't be trusted. Because if it came down to it, I needed them to believe I wasn't the problem." My knees nearly gave out. "He was protecting the company," she continued. "Not me. Never me." Everything clicked into place. My father had used Riley just like he used me. To protect his name, his money, his empire. He didn't care who fell as long as he stayed standing. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I lost," she said. "And you're still standing." I left without another word. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with a state investigator. I handed over everything, every document, every transfer, every email, and now, Riley's confession. I didn't ask for immunity. I wasn't there for leniency. I was there for truth and justice. Within 2 weeks, a warrant was issued for my father's arrest. It was front-page news. The empire crumbled completely. He was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice. The house was seized. Bank accounts frozen. My mother vanished from public life. Riley left Georgia entirely. And me? I started over. This time, not with fire, but with soil. I bought a small house near Tybee Island, painted the porch light blue, planted sunflowers in the yard, adopted a cat named Oliver. I started a nonprofit for whistleblowers, people like me, silenced by power, afraid to speak. We helped them find their voice again. Because if I'd learned anything through all of it, it was this. You don't need a perfect family to be whole. You don't need revenge to feel strong. But sometimes, the only way to heal is to stop protecting what broke you. And that's what I had done. Not just once, but every day since. The news of my father's arrest spread like wildfire. Savannah had never seen anything like it. A respected businessman led away in handcuffs, reporters swarming the courthouse steps, cameras flashing as though it were some celebrity scandal. But this was no tabloid drama. It was the collapse of a kingdom that had ruled through silence and intimidation for years. And I, the daughter they tried to erase, was the spark that lit the fuse. I didn't attend the court hearings. I didn't stand on the sidelines with folded arms, watching them squirm under pressure. I didn't need to. The system they had believed would always protect them had finally turned. They were on their own now. For the first time in their lives, they would be held accountable. And that was enough for me. I spent most of those days quietly. Mornings in the garden, afternoons with Oliver curled at my feet while I wrote. I didn't speak to journalists, didn't post cryptic quotes on social media, didn't look for sympathy or applause. What I had done wasn't a performance. It was survival. And now that I had it, I was determined to keep it simple, clean, honest. My inbox, though, said otherwise. Messages poured in from strangers, some telling me I was brave, others accusing me of betrayal. I read them all, every single one, because for the first time, I could. I didn't flinch. I didn't fold. I absorbed their words and let them pass through me. The world had seen the truth, and now it was reacting in every way it knew how. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, no handwriting on the envelope, just my name printed in all caps. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 4 words. You did the right thing. I turned it over. Blank. No signature. No clue who sent it. But I didn't need one. Somehow, I already knew. It wasn't Riley. It wasn't my mother. It was someone who had watched quietly, maybe from the sidelines of our lives, maybe from their own. Someone who saw the storm and understood what it took to stand in the middle of it. That night, I lit a candle and sat on my porch, watching the flame flicker against the dark. The sky above Tybee Island was clear, and the ocean wind whispered through the trees like an old lullaby. I thought about the girl I used to be, so eager to belong, so desperate for approval from people who would never give it freely. I thought about all the moments I had stayed quiet when I should have spoken, all the nights I cried into my pillow because no one wanted to hear the truth. And now here I was, alone, but free, hurt, but whole. A month after the final court ruling, which sentenced my father to 5 years in federal prison, my mother sent me a message. It came through email, formal and cautious. Skylar, I know we are beyond repair, but I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I see now what I refused to see before. Take care of yourself. Mom. I read it 5 times. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumph. Just release. Like the final thread tying me to that old life had been severed. I didn't reply. Not because I hated her. Not even because I was angry. But because I had nothing left to say. Some things don't need closure in words. They just need to end. Ellie came to visit me soon after. We sat on my porch sipping iced tea, watching the light filter through the trees. She hadn't changed much, though there was a calmness to her now, a confidence that hadn't been there before. You look different, she said. I feel different. You did something most people only dream of, you know that? I didn't do it for glory. I know. That's what makes it matter. We sat in silence for a while, comfortable and easy. Do you ever miss them? She asked quietly. I thought about it. I miss the idea of them, the version I thought they were, the Sunday brunches, the movie nights, the birthday cakes, but not the people they actually were, not the way they made me feel small, invisible. That makes sense. I looked over at her. Do you think that's messed up? She shook her head. I think that's healing. The nonprofit began to grow. I called it Voice Unseen. Within 6 months, we had a full team, lawyers, writers, advocates, helping people speak up against abuse in all its forms. Whistleblowers, survivors of workplace harassment, children pushed out of their homes for telling the truth. We gave them tools, support, community. We told them what I had once needed someone to tell me. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are not wrong for speaking up. The work was hard, sometimes triggering, but it filled the spaces in me that used to ache. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was helping others survive. And with every story I heard, every person who looked me in the eye and said, "You gave me strength," I found a little more of myself. One afternoon, a young woman named Mia came into the office. She looked about 20, her hands shaking as she handed over a folder. "They told me I'd ruin everything," she said. "That if I talked, no one would believe me. They said I was selfish." I took her hand gently. "That's what they say when they're afraid of the truth." She cried, right there in the office, in front of everyone. And no one looked away. No one rushed her. We just let her be. That night, I went home and looked in the mirror. For the first time in years, I liked what I saw. Not because I looked different, but because I felt different. I had spent so long trying to be quiet, to take up less space, to keep the peace. But now, I was unapologetically present. People began inviting me to speak at conferences, panels, schools. I told my story not as a victim, but as a witness, a survivor, a woman who stood up when the people closest to her tried to push her down. I didn't glamorize it. I didn't wrap it in a bow. I told the truth. And the truth, it turned out, was more powerful than any polished lie. I still get emails from time to time. Some kind, some cruel. But I answer the ones that matter. The ones that ask, "How did you do it?" And I tell them, I didn't do it all at once. I did it in pieces, one brave moment at a time. I did it because silence wasn't an option. I did it because no one else would. And most importantly, I did it because I finally realized that I was worth saving. 2 years passed. The headlines faded. My name was no longer whispered in grocery store aisles or printed in bold font beneath scandalous headlines. Savannah had moved on, as cities always do. People find new gossip, new outrage, new stories to devour. But I wasn't the same. I hadn't just moved on. I had been rebuilt, brick by brick, memory by memory. I lived in the same little house by Tybee Island, though now the sunflowers had spread further, leaning against the porch railings and brushing the windows. The ocean air felt like a balm instead of a reminder. And Oliver had grown fat and demanding, sitting at the edge of the window every afternoon like a king surveying his territory. Voice Unseen had grown too. What started as a small initiative had become a national network. We now had chapters in 7 states, and I traveled regularly to meet the people we helped. There were stories that gutted me, stories that lit a fire in my chest, and stories that reminded me that even in the darkest families, the deepest betrayals, there were people still trying to make things right. And in those stories, I often saw glimpses of myself. One late fall evening, I was invited to speak at a university in North Carolina. The hall was packed. Students, faculty, survivors. Some had read the articles from years ago. Others knew nothing about me, only that I was a woman who refused to stay silent. I stood behind the podium, hands steady, voice calm, and told them the truth. Not just the facts, but the emotions, the confusion, the cost. When I finished, there was a long silence, then applause. Not loud or wild, but sustained, deep, respectful. I stepped off the stage and a line formed. They didn't want autographs. They wanted connection. A girl with tears in her eyes hugged me without asking. A boy whose father had disowned him whispered, "Thank you." A professor slipped me a note that said, "You reminded me why I started teaching." And then, as the room began to clear, I saw her, Riley. She stood at the back, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her hair darker now, shorter. Her eyes met mine for a single moment before she turned to leave. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. That was enough. Just the sight of her in the room, hearing me speak words she once tried to bury, was the final thread tying us together. And it was severed. When I returned home, there was a letter waiting for me in my mailbox. Handwritten this time, carefully. "Skylar, I heard you speak tonight. I don't expect you to want anything to do with me, but I wanted you to know. I'm trying. Not for forgiveness, but for myself. I lost everything because of who I became. I still live with that. I probably always will. But for the first time, I think I want to become someone else. Someone better. Thank you, Riley." I sat on my porch with the letter in my hands until the sky turned orange and pink with sunset. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply breathed. Because that's what healing looks like. Not dramatic reconciliations or teary reunions, but quiet acknowledgments. Truth. Accountability. And even if we never spoke again, that letter was proof that some part of her understood what she had done. My mother never reached out again. My father served 2 years before being released early on health grounds. I didn't follow his story. I didn't ask about him. I didn't need that weight anymore. Let them live in the shadows they built for themselves. I had sunlight now. I spent my 31st birthday alone by choice. I woke early and drove to the edge of the island, where the land met the ocean in long, peaceful waves. I brought a journal and a thermos of coffee, wrapped myself in a sweater, and watched the tide roll in and out. I wrote a letter that day, not to anyone else, but to myself. Dear Skylar, you survived. You were told you were too emotional, too loud, too much. But those were the exact pieces of you that saved you. Don't shrink for anyone. Don't dim to fit. You deserve joy, not just survival. So choose it. Every day, even when it's hard. I tore the page from my journal and folded it into a small boat. Then I placed it on the water and let it float away, carried by the same tide that once tried to drown me. A few months later, I met someone. His name was Daniel. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and a laugh that came from his chest. We met at a bookstore, reaching for the same novel. He said something witty. I said something sarcastic. And that was it. We started slowly. I told him everything. Who I was, what I'd done, where I'd come from. He didn't flinch. He didn't pity me. He just listened. And one night, months later, when we were lying under the stars, he turned to me and said, "You make me believe in second chances." We didn't rush. We didn't need to. Healing isn't measured in dates or labels. It's measured in how freely you can breathe around someone. And with him, I breathed easily. Voice unseen continued to grow. I stepped back slightly, letting others lead, others who had found strength through our work and wanted to pass it on. I focused more on writing, on storytelling. I published a memoir, raw, unflinching, honest. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about who I became because of it. The book reached more people than I could have imagined. Book tours, interviews, podcasts. I never got used to the attention, but I accepted it because I knew the message mattered more than my comfort. And every time someone said, "This gave me courage," I remembered why I told the story in the first place. To free others. To free myself. Years later, I visited the house I grew up in. It had been sold after my father's conviction. A new family lived there now. Kids played in the yard. The porch swing still creaked in the wind. I didn't go inside. I didn't knock. I just stood across the street and watched. And for the first time, I felt no pain, no longing, only gratitude. That house built me. It broke me, but it also taught me how to rebuild. And I did, brick by brick, memory by memory, truth by truth. This was never just a story of revenge. It was a story of reclaiming, of rising, of speaking even when your voice shakes, even when the world calls you trouble. Because sometimes, being trouble is exactly what it takes to burn the lies down. And in their ashes, you find freedom. You find light. You find yourself. That was my ending. Have you ever stood up to the very people who raised you, knowing it would cost you everything, but doing it anyway because your truth mattered more? If Skylar's story resonated with you, please leave a comment and share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of reclaiming identity and choosing self-worth over silence. And if you know someone who's been made to feel invisible by their own family, share this with them. Because sometimes the only way to heal is by burning the lies down and walking into the light on your own terms.